The moment Ethan Cole saw the broken wagons scattered across the Wyoming Trail, he knew something terrible had happened. The air was too still. The crows circled too low. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. December 15th, 1885, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 8 miles east of Laramie Pass, where the wind cut through a man's coat like a knife through paper. Ethan slowed his tired mare and stared at the splintered wood and torn canvas ahead. He had seen many dead men during the war between the states. He had tracked Confederate scouts through Virginia forests thick with morning fog. He had watched friends fall at Gettysburg, their blood turning the summer grass dark as wine. But this scene felt different. It carried the scent of betrayal, cold and deliberate as a hangman's noose. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching in the snow. The Winchester 1873 rifle felt heavy in his hands. 6 rounds of .44-40 ammunition left. He would need to make each one count if trouble found him here. The first wagon lay on its side like a wounded animal. The wheels were shattered. The canvas cover had been ripped apart by bullets. Clean holes punched through the fabric in patterns that spoke of men who knew how to shoot. Blood streaked the white snow in frozen ribbons. The smell hit him next. Old iron and dust, and something far worse. Death in winter, where the cold preserved everything like a photograph that would never fade. Ethan checked the bodies one by one. 4 men lay scattered like tossed dolls, each with wounds that spoke of a fast and merciless attack. 2 wore the clothes of city merchants, wool coats with brass buttons, boots made for boardwalks, not wilderness trails. 2 others were guards, hired protection, their Remington rifles lying useless in the snow beside their stiffened hands. He knelt beside a young man no older than 20. Dust covered the boy's face. A woman half buried under a shattered crate and a canvas tarp heavy with snow. Dirt streaked her skin. Her dress, torn and stained with blood, had once been fine material, the kind a settler woman would never wear on a frontier trail. Her dark hair tangled across the frozen ground like black silk thrown down by careless hands. She lay on her side, breathing shallow and weak, each breath a small cloud of vapor that dissipated instantly in the freezing air. Ethan lifted the crate off her. She flinched hard, eyes snapping open in pure animal panic. Terror washed across her face. She looked at him as if she expected the next shot to come from his hand, the final bullet that would end her suffering. He lowered his voice to a soft tone he had not used in years, not since Margaret died, not since he last spoke words of comfort to another human soul. "You are all right," he said. "I am here to help you." She tried to speak, but her voice was nothing more than a rasp, dry as dead leaves. He slid an arm behind her shoulders and gently raised her up. The weight of her was nothing. She felt fragile as bird bones wrapped in cloth. He pressed his canteen to her lips. "Easy now, drink slow." Water dripped down her chin. Her eyes fluttered as she swallowed. She trembled from pain and shock, her body fighting to stay conscious, fighting to stay alive. Ethan could see a deep bruise along her left arm, dark purple spreading beneath her pale skin. A cut across her forehead leaked blood in a thin line. And worse, a bullet grazed along her shoulder, the flesh torn an angry red against the white snow. Whoever attacked the wagon wanted her dead too. But there was something odd about her. Her clothes, though filthy and torn, were made of material too fine for these parts. The stitching was delicate, precise, the work of tailors who charged more for a single dress than most men earned in a month. And when she whispered, her accent was crisp, shaped by distant places and expensive educations. "They came at dawn," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Bandits, I think. They killed everyone." Ethan nodded. "I am sorry, I truly am." She closed her eyes. Tears slipped through, cutting clean lines down her dirty cheeks. He tore a strip of fabric from his own shirt and tied it across her shoulder wound. He had done many rough things in his life, patched many injuries in field hospitals during the war, but he had never been careless with the hurting. Not after Margaret. Not after learning what it meant to lose someone because you were not fast enough, not careful enough, not there when it mattered most. "We need a doctor," he said. "Closest is Medicine Bow Station. I will get you there." She gave a faint nod before collapsing against him, her body limp with exhaustion, her consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. Then he heard it. Another sound, softer than the woman's moaning. A child's whimper coming from deeper under the wagon wreckage. Ethan's blood went cold. He lowered the woman gently to the ground and crawled beneath the overturned wagon bed. There, huddled in the small space between two wooden slats, was a little girl. 6 years old, maybe 7, blonde hair matted with dirt and snow, blue eyes wide and unblinking, staring at nothing and everything at once. She wore a coat too small for the weather, her hands blue with cold, her lips tinged purple. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just stared. "It is all right," Ethan said softly, extending his hand. "I am not going to hurt you." The girl did not move, did not blink. Shock had stolen her voice, locked it away somewhere deep inside where words could not reach. Ethan crawled closer. "Your mother needs help. I need to get both of you somewhere warm. Will you come with me?" Still nothing. But when he gently took her small hand in his rough, calloused one, she did not pull away. That was enough. He lifted her out of the wreckage and carried her to where her mother lay. The woman stirred slightly when he placed the child beside her. "Grace," the woman whispered, "my daughter, please, save my daughter." "I will save both of you," Ethan said. "But you have to trust me." The woman looked into his eyes, searching for something. Hope, maybe, or just a reason to believe that the world still held men who helped instead of harmed. She must have found what she needed because she nodded once, then surrendered to unconsciousness. Ethan worked quickly. He had maybe 2 hours before the next blizzard rolled in from the mountains. He could see it building on the western horizon, dark clouds pregnant with snow, advancing like an army across the plains. Medicine Bow was 20 miles south, too far, but his ranch, Broken Pine, was only 5 miles east. It would have to do. He lifted the woman carefully into his arms. She weighed so little it made his chest ache. He carried her to his mare and seated her gently in front of the saddle. He took the little girl, Grace, and placed her in front of her mother, wrapping his coat around both of them. The child still had not spoken, had not made a sound, just that wide-eyed stare that looked through him rather than at him. Ethan searched the rubble for anything useful. A half-full canteen, a few biscuits wrapped in oilcloth, a small trunk, crushed but intact. Inside, beneath layers of dresses and undergarments, he found a cameo brooch carved with a family crest he did not recognize. 3 pine trees beneath a crown, with Latin words he could not read. Something about it felt important, heavy with meaning beyond mere decoration. He pocketed it, planning to return it when the woman recovered, if she recovered. Then he mounted his horse, holding both the woman and the child steady against him as he turned the mare east toward home. The journey was slow, the sun cruel in its brightness, offering light but no warmth. The land dry as old bone beneath the blanket of snow. With every mile, he kept asking himself the same question. Who is she? Why would anyone seek to kill a woman who dressed like that and spoke with an accent like that? And the child. What had that little girl seen? What horrors had stolen her voice and left only that empty stare? The memories came unbidden as he rode. They always did when he was alone with his thoughts. 2 years ago, spring of 1883, Margaret dying in their bed while cherry curry. Blossoms bloomed outside the window. Smallpox had come through the valley that year, taking the young and the old without mercy, playing no favorites among the living. He remembered holding her hand as the fever burned through her body. The pustules that covered her beautiful skin. The way she looked at him with eyes that still held love, even as they dimmed with approaching death. "Promise me," she had whispered, her voice already half gone to the other side. "Promise me you will not let yourself die with me. Promise you will live, Ethan. Promise you will protect those who need you." "I promise," he had said, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking. "I swear it, even if it costs me everything." "Then I can rest," she had said, and then she was gone. He buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, where she could see the mountain she loved. He carved her name into a wooden cross with his own hands. Margaret Ann Cole, beloved wife, taken too soon. And every day since he wore her ring on a rawhide cord around his neck, a weight he carried willingly, a reminder of what he had lost and what he had promised. The ranch came into view as the sun touched the western mountains. Broken Pine. 200 acres of stubborn Wyoming soil, a small house built from logs and hope, A barn that leaned slightly to the left, fences that needed mending, and a herd of cattle that had shrunk from 50 head to 12 over 2 hard winters. On the kitchen table inside, buried under a thin layer of dust, was a letter from the bank. Final notice: pay $800 by March 1st, 1886, or the property would be seized. 3 months. He had 3 months to save a life's work, to keep the promise he made to Margaret, to prove that a man could hold on even when the whole world seemed determined to make him let go. He dismounted and carried the woman into the house. The little girl, Grace, followed silently, her small hand clutching the hem of his shirt. Inside, the house was cold. He had let the fire die that morning, not expecting to return with anyone who needed warmth. Ethan laid the woman on the bed in Margaret's old room, the room he had kept locked for 2 years, unable to face the memories it held, unable to pack away the dresses still hanging in the wardrobe, the hairbrush still sitting on the dresser, the photograph of them on their wedding day still nailed to the wall. But now the door was open, and a stranger lay in Margaret's bed, and somehow it felt right. Like this was what Margaret had meant when she made him promise. Like this was the path he was supposed to walk. He started a fire in the hearth. He boiled water on the stove. He washed the woman's wounds with whiskey, the only antiseptic he had, and she bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming as the alcohol burned through torn flesh. He threaded a needle with fishing line and stitched the bullet graze on her shoulder. 9 careful stitches, each one placed with hands that had learned surgery from battlefield necessity. The little girl, Grace, sat in the corner the entire time. She held a rag doll, ancient and dirty, its button eyes hanging by threads. She did not cry, did not speak, just watched with those blue eyes that had seen too much. When Ethan finished bandaging her mother's wounds, he turned to the child. He knelt down to her level, his knees creaking, his back aching from the cold and the work. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She did not respond. "Thirsty?" Nothing. He went to the kitchen and returned with a cup of warm broth made from dried venison and potatoes. He held it out to her. "Just a sip, it will help." Grace looked at the cup, then at him, then at her mother lying pale and still on the bed. Finally, slowly, she reached out and took the cup in both small hands. She drank. Not much. Just enough to prove she was still there, still fighting, still alive. "Good girl," Ethan said softly. That night he did not sleep. He sat in a chair beside the bed, watching over the woman and child like a shepherd guards his flock. The wind howled outside. Snow began to fall, thick and heavy. The blizzard he had seen building finally arriving with all its winter fury. They were trapped now. No one could travel in this, not for days. The woman stirred around midnight. Fever burned through her body. She mumbled in her delirium, words that made no sense, names he did not recognize. "Thomas," she whispered. "Do not. Grace. Run." Ethan wiped her forehead with a damp cloth. "You are safe," he said, though she could not hear him. "Both of you are safe." But even as he said it, he wondered if it was true. Because men who attacked wagons with that kind of precision, who searched the wreckage that thoroughly, who left a trail of bodies in the snow without taking any loot, those men did not give up easily. They would come looking. And when they did, Ethan would have to decide how far he was willing to go to keep a promise made to a dying woman 2 years ago. Grace did not sleep either. While her mother tossed in fever dreams, the little girl took a piece of charcoal from the fireplace and began to draw on the wooden wall. Ethan watched her work, watched the image take shape in the flickering firelight. A man in a black coat, a gun in his hand, and beside him a body lying in a pool of darkness that could only be blood. Above the body, Grace had written in crooked letters, "Grandfather." Ethan felt his blood turn cold. He moved to kneel beside her. "Grace," he said softly, "can you tell me what happened?" She looked at him with those haunted blue eyes. Then she pointed at the drawing, then at her mother. Then she made a gesture like someone running, her small legs pumping in place. "Someone killed your grandfather," Ethan said, understanding now. "And now they are chasing you and your mother." Grace nodded once. A single tear rolled down her cheek, the first emotion she had shown since he found her. Ethan reached out and gently wiped the tear away. "I cannot bring your grandfather back," he said. But I can protect you. I can protect your mother. Do you believe me? Grace studied his face for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded again. Good, Ethan said, because I do not break promises. Ever. The woman woke at dawn. The fever had broken during the night, leaving her weak but lucid. She opened her eyes and looked around the unfamiliar room, at the fire burning in the hearth, at the photograph of Ethan and Margaret on the wall, at her daughter sleeping finally in a nest of blankets on the floor. Where am I? She whispered. Ethan stood from his chair, his joints stiff from sitting all night. My ranch. Broken Pine. 5 miles east of where I found you. She tried to sit up, winced at the pain in her shoulder, and lay back down. Grace, is she? She is fine, unhurt, just frightened. The woman closed her eyes in relief. Thank God. Thank God. What is your name? Ethan asked. She hesitated. Fear flickered across her face. The same fear he had seen when he first pulled her from the wreckage. The fear of someone who knows that her name might be her death warrant. You can trust me, Ethan said, or do not trust me. But you are here, and you are hurt, and that little girl needs her mother alive. So whatever you are running from, whatever brought you to Wyoming in the middle of winter, it can wait until you are strong enough to run again. The woman looked at him for a long time. Then she said, My name is Victoria Ashford. The name meant nothing to Ethan, but the way she said it, the weight behind those 3 words told him everything he needed to know. This was not a simple name. This was a title, a burden, a target painted on her back. Lady Victoria Ashford, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. My father was the Earl of Ashford, in England. Ethan felt the pieces falling into place. The fine clothes, the careful stitching, the brooch with the family crest, the men who attacked with such precision, searching for something specific, searching for her. What happened? He asked. Victoria turned her head to look at Grace, still sleeping peacefully for the first time in who knows how long. My father was murdered 3 months ago in London. Poisoned. The official story was natural causes. But I knew better. Our family lawyer, Thomas Blackwell, stood to gain control of the estate if I died without an heir. But I have Grace. Who is her father? Ethan asked, though he suspected the answer. A British officer. He died at Rorke's Drift in '79, before Grace was born. We were never married. My father was furious, called Grace a stain on the family name. My mother arranged a marriage for me to the Duke of Somerset, an old man, 60 years old, who wanted a young wife and did not care about scandal as long as I brought a dowry. So you ran, Ethan said. I ran, Victoria confirmed. I took Grace and what money I could carry and fled to America. I thought we would be safe here. I thought the ocean would be enough distance. But Blackwell followed. He hired men, bounty hunters, killers who do not care about borders or laws. Why does he want you dead so badly? Ethan asked. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Because he loved my mother. 20 years ago, they had an affair. My father discovered it and destroyed Blackwell's reputation, ruined him publicly, called him the bastard son of a bastard duke in front of the entire House of Lords. Blackwell swore revenge. And now that my father is dead, he wants to finish what he started. He wants to take everything. The title, the land, the fortune. And Grace? Ethan asked quietly. Victoria's face crumpled. He wants Grace too, not to kill her, to keep her. He thinks if he raises her as his own daughter, he can fix the past. He can become the father he never had. He can prove he is not just a bastard. He is insane, Ethan, completely insane. Ethan absorbed this information slowly. A lawyer turned murderer, a man twisted by class prejudice and obsession, a man who would cross an ocean and kill innocent travelers just to reclaim some warped version of dignity. You are safe here, Ethan said finally. For now. But we need to be smart about what comes next. Victoria wiped her eyes. You do not understand. Blackwell has money, resources. He can hire 100 men if he wants. We cannot fight him. Maybe not, Ethan said. But we do not have to fight him today. Today, you rest, you heal, and I will make sure no one gets through that door who means you harm. Why? Victoria asked, her voice breaking. Why would you risk yourself for strangers? Ethan reached up and touched the rawhide cord around his neck, feeling the weight of Margaret's ring beneath his shirt. Because 2 years ago, my wife made me promise something. She made me promise to live, to protect those who need protecting. I have not kept that promise very well since she died, but I am keeping it now. Victoria reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak but sincere. Thank you, she whispered. I do not know how to repay you. You repay me by surviving, Ethan said. You and Grace both. The blizzard raged for 3 days. Snow piled 6 feet high against the sides of the house. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero. The world outside became a white void where nothing moved and nothing lived. But inside, the fire burned warm. Ethan cooked simple meals: venison stew, cornbread, hot coffee that tasted like charcoal, but kept them awake and fighting. Grace slowly began to emerge from her shell. She still did not speak, but she started to move around the house. She helped Ethan feed wood to the fire. She sat beside her mother and held her hand. And once, when Ethan was carving a piece of wood into a toy horse for her, she actually smiled. Just a small thing, barely visible, but it was there. On the fourth day, the storm finally broke. The sun came out, blinding bright against the snow, and with it came a visitor. Ethan saw him from the window, a single rider approaching from the south, moving slowly through the deep drifts. A man wearing a sheriff's badge that glinted silver in the morning light. Tom Brennan, 52 years old, sheriff of Carbon County, a former Texas Ranger who had moved north after losing his son at the Battle of Little Bighorn in '76. A good man, as far as Ethan knew, but also a man of the law, and the law did not always align with what was right. Ethan stepped outside and waited on the porch. His Winchester leaned against the doorframe within easy reach. Just in case. Brennan rode up and dismounted, his breath steaming in the cold air. Morning, Ethan. Tom. Hell of a storm, Brennan said, stomping snow from his boots. Lost 2 homesteads to collapsed roofs. One family froze to death when their fire went out. Hard winter, Ethan agreed. Brennan looked at him carefully. Heard you found something on the trail. Before the storm hit, some bodies. Ethan said nothing. Stage driver from Medicine Bow came through my office, Brennan continued. Said he found 4 dead men and 2 empty wagons 8 miles west of here. Said it looked like a massacre. Professional work. Not Indians. Not ordinary bandits. That is what it looked like to me, too, Ethan said. Find anybody alive? Brennan asked. Ethan hesitated. This was the moment, the decision point. He could lie, send Brennan away, keep Victoria and Grace hidden until they were strong enough to move on. Or he could tell the truth and trust that the law would protect them better than he could alone. He thought of Margaret, of her voice whispering in his memory. Protect those who need protecting. Come inside, Ethan said finally. There is someone you should meet. Brennan followed him into the house. Victoria was sitting up in bed now, wearing one of Margaret's old dresses that Ethan had found in the wardrobe. Grace sat beside her, still silent, still watchful. Both of them tensed when they saw the sheriff's badge. This is Lady Victoria Ashford, Ethan said, and her daughter Grace. They were the only survivors of the attack. Brennan removed his hat. Ma'am, I am sorry for what happened to you, but I need to ask you some questions. Victoria nodded slowly. I understand. For the next hour, she told her story. She left out nothing. The murder of her father, the pursuit across the Atlantic, the attack on the wagon. Brennan listened without interrupting, his weathered face giving away nothing. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I believe you, ma'am, every word, but believing you and being able to help you are 2 different things. What do you mean? Ethan asked. Brennan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded telegram. He handed it to Ethan. This came through yesterday, from Cheyenne. Ethan unfolded the paper and read, Wanted for questioning, Lady Victoria Ashford, British subject, suspicion of patricide, reward $3,000 for information leading to location, additional $1,000 for safe return of minor child Grace Ashford. Contact Thomas Blackwell, Esquire, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Victoria's face went white. He is here, in Wyoming. Looks that way, Brennan said grimly. You are going to arrest me, Victoria said, her voice shaking. You have to. Brennan shook his head. No, ma'am, I am not, because I do not think you killed your father, and I do not think that reward is about justice. It is about revenge. Then what do we do? Ethan asked. Brennan looked at both of them. We need proof, real evidence that Blackwell killed the Earl. Without that, you are just a fugitive running from a legal warrant. But with proof, we can turn this around, make him the hunted instead of the hunter. My mother is investigating in London, Victoria said, but it will take months to gather evidence and send it here. Then we buy you months, Brennan said. I will put out word that you were not found, that you likely died in the attack and the bodies were carried off by wolves. That should slow Blackwell down. Will it be enough? Ethan asked. I do not know, Brennan admitted, but it is the best chance we have. Brennan hesitated, then reached into his coat again and pulled out a second telegram, this one crumpled and worn as if it had been read many times. There is something else you should know. I received this 3 days ago. Anonymous. No signature, no return address. He handed the telegram to Ethan. The message was brief but chilling. Thomas Blackwell not alone stopped someone in London, funding his operations. Stop evidence suggests traitor within Ashford household. Stop protect the girl at all costs. Stop. Ethan read it twice, then handed it to Victoria. Her hands shook as she scanned the words. Someone in my own house? Someone I trusted? Could be a servant, Brennan said. Could be family. Could be anyone with access to your father's papers and your travel plans. But who sent this warning? Victoria asked, her voice barely a whisper. That is the question, Brennan said. Whoever it is, they want you alive. They are taking a risk to warn you, but without knowing who they are, we cannot trust them completely either. Ethan folded the telegram and put it in his pocket. We have an unknown ally. That is better than nothing. Or, Victoria said darkly, we have someone playing both sides. Someone who wants to see what we do next. The possibility hung in the air like smoke. As Brennan prepared to leave, he pulled Ethan aside. You know what you are doing? Harboring a wanted woman? If Blackwell finds out, he will come for you too. I know, Ethan said, and you are still gonna do it. I made a promise once, Ethan said quietly, to my wife, that I would protect those who need protecting. I aim to keep it. Brennan clapped him on the shoulder. You are a good man, Ethan Cole, stubborn as a Missouri mule, but good. Just do not get yourself killed being noble. I will try, Ethan said. But as he watched Brennan ride away through the snow, he knew the truth. Nobility and survival rarely walk the same path. And when Thomas Blackwell finally came, and Ethan knew he would come, only one of them would walk away alive. That night, as Grace finally fell asleep and Victoria rested peacefully for the first time since the attack, Ethan sat alone on the porch. The stars burned cold and bright overhead. The wind whispered through the broken pine trees that gave the ranch its name. He pulled Margaret's ring from beneath his shirt and held it in his palm. The metal was warm from his body heat, worn smooth from 2 years of constant contact. I am trying, he whispered to the night, to the stars, to the memory of a woman who was gone but never truly left. I am trying to keep my promise. Help me be strong enough. Help me be good enough. The wind answered with silence. But somewhere in that silence, Ethan felt something shift. A weight lifting, a door opening. The first step on a path he had been afraid to walk for 2 long years. He was not alone anymore. He had Victoria. He had Grace. And somehow, impossibly, that made all the difference. When he went back inside and saw the little girl sleeping peacefully, her mother's hand resting protectively on her shoulder, Ethan made a new promise. Not to a ghost, not to a memory, but to himself, whatever came through that door. Whatever men Thomas Blackwell sent, whatever forces of law or violence or money tried to take these 2 people from him, they would have to go through Ethan Cole first, and he would not go down easy. The broken pine had bent in too many storms to break now. December 22nd, 1885. The attack came on the 3rd night after Sheriff Brennan's visit. Ethan woke to the sound that every frontiersman learned to fear. Silence. Not the peaceful quiet of deep winter, but the unnatural hush that meant predators were circling. That danger had found its way to your doorstep and was deciding how best to break down the door. He rolled from his bedroll on the floor, his hand already reaching for the Winchester. Through the window he could see nothing but darkness and falling snow, But his instincts, honed by years of war and survival, screamed that something was wrong. Then he heard it, a faint jingle of spurs. The soft crunch of boots on frozen snow, trying and failing to move silently. 4 men, maybe 5, spreading out around the house in a pattern that spoke of military training or hired expertise. Ethan moved quickly to Victoria's room. She was already awake, sitting up in bed with Grace clutched against her chest. The little girl's eyes were wide, but she made no sound, as if she understood instinctively that silence meant survival. "They are here," Ethan whispered. Victoria nodded. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with determination. "What do we do?" "You take Grace to the root cellar. There is a trap door under the kitchen table. Get down there and do not come out until I say it is safe." "What about you?" "I'm going to convince them this was a bad idea." Before Victoria could argue, the first gunshot shattered the night. The bullet punched through the window and buried itself in the opposite wall, exactly where Ethan's head would have been if he were still sleeping. They were not here to talk. They were here to kill. Ethan dropped to the floor and fired back through the broken window. The muzzle flash lit the room like lightning. Outside, someone cursed in pain. First blood to the defender. "Go!" Ethan shouted to Victoria. "Now!" She scooped Grace into her arms and ran for the kitchen. Ethan heard the trap door scrape open, heard them descend into the darkness below. Good. Whatever happened next, at least they had a chance. The house exploded with gunfire. Bullets ripped through the walls from 3 different directions. The attackers had positioned themselves well, creating crossfire that would shred anyone caught in the open. But Ethan was not in the open. He moved like smoke through his own house, using furniture for cover, returning fire from different windows to make them think there were multiple defenders. He recognized the pattern of the attack. Professional gunmen, bounty hunters who had done this before, who knew how to flush prey from cover, which meant Thomas Blackwell had money and connections and no qualms about spending both to get what he wanted. A torch came flying through the broken window, trailing fire and kerosene. It landed on the wooden floor, and flames began to spread hungrily across the dry boards. They were going to burn him out. Ethan grabbed a blanket and smothered the flames before they could take hold. But another torch followed, then another. The bastards had plenty of fire and plenty of time. He needed to change the equation. He moved to the back door and eased it open. Snow and wind rushed in, along with the sharp smell of gun smoke. He could see one of the attackers silhouetted against the white landscape, reloading behind the water trough. Ethan took careful aim with the Winchester and squeezed the trigger. The man went down hard, his rifle clattering across the frozen ground. But the shot gave away Ethan's position. Bullets chewed into the doorframe, forcing him back inside. Splinters of wood exploded like shrapnel, one piece cutting a hot line across his cheek. He tasted blood. From the cellar, he heard Grace whimper. Just once. Just a tiny sound of fear. And something in Ethan hardened into cold steel. These men had come to his home, had threatened a woman and child under his protection, had broken the oldest law of the frontier, the unwritten code that said you did not make war on the innocent. They were going to pay for that mistake. Ethan grabbed his Colt Peacemaker from the gun belt hanging by the door. 2 weapons now, rifle in one hand, revolver in the other. He kicked the back door fully open and charged into the night like a fury from the Old Testament, like vengeance wearing human skin. The attackers were not expecting a counterattack. They had grown comfortable with their numerical advantage, confident that the lone rancher would cower inside while they burned him out. That confidence cost them. Ethan shot the first man he saw, center mass, dropping him into the snow. He pivoted and fired the rifle at the second man trying to flank from the barn, the bullet catching him in the shoulder and spinning him around like a child's top. The man screamed and fell. Then someone tackled Ethan from the side, driving him down into the snow. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs and sent both guns flying from his hands. A fist connected with his jaw. Stars exploded across his vision. Another punch landed on his ribs, sharp and brutal. Ethan drove his forehead up into his attacker's face, felt the satisfying crunch of a breaking nose. The man's grip loosened and Ethan threw him off, rolling sideways to grab the Winchester where it had fallen. He came up shooting, putting 3 rounds into the man who had tackled him, watching him collapse backward into the snow that was no longer white but red. Movement to his left. Ethan spun and saw the last attacker, a big man with a knife in his hand, charging like a bull. No time to aim, no time to think. Ethan dropped the empty rifle and drew the Bowie knife from his boot sheath. The two men collided in a tangle of limbs and steel. They went down together, rolling through the snow, each trying to drive their blade into the other's flesh. The big man was strong, younger than Ethan, with muscle born from hard living and harder violence. But Ethan had something the other man did not. He had a reason to live. He had people depending on him, and that made all the difference. Ethan hooked his leg around the big man's knee and twisted, using leverage instead of strength. The man fell sideways and Ethan was on top of him instantly, pressing his knife down toward the exposed throat. The big man caught Ethan's wrist with both hands, straining to hold back the descending blade. For a moment they were frozen like that, two men locked in mortal struggle, breath steaming in the frozen air. Then Ethan shifted his weight and drove his elbow into the man's face. Once, twice, three times. The grip on his wrist weakened. The knife descended, found flesh, went deep. The big man shuddered once and was still. Ethan rolled off the body, gasping for air, his hands shaking from adrenaline and cold. Four men down, four attackers who had come to kill him and take Victoria and Grace. Four men who would never threaten anyone again. But even as he caught his breath, he knew this was not the end. This was just the opening move in a game that would not finish until either Thomas Blackwell or Ethan Cole was in the ground. He gathered the weapons from the dead men, 3 Colt revolvers, 2 Remington rifles, ammunition enough to fight a small war. He also found something else. A leather wallet in the coat pocket of the man who had tackled him. Inside was a telegram. Eliminate woman, acquire child unharmed, $5,000 on completion. Blackwell. Ethan felt rage burn hot in his chest. Eliminate. Like Victoria was a problem to be solved instead of a human being. And Grace. Acquire. Like she was property to be collected. Thomas Blackwell was not just a murderer. He was a monster who had convinced himself his actions were justified. Ethan went back inside the house. Smoke still hung in the air from the burning torches he had extinguished. Bullet holes pocked the walls like smallpox scars, but the structure still stood. The home he had built with Margaret still held. He opened the trap door to the root cellar. Victoria, it is safe now. You can come out. She emerged slowly, Grace still clutched against her chest. Both were covered in dust and cobwebs, but otherwise unharmed. When Victoria saw the blood on Ethan's face and the bodies visible through the open door, she went pale. Are they dead? She whispered. Yes. All of them? Yes. She set Grace down gently and walked to Ethan. Without warning, she threw her arms around him and held on tight, her whole body trembling with relief and terror and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered into his shoulder. Thank you for saving us. Ethan stood stiffly, unused to being embraced, unused to human contact after 2 years of isolation. But slowly, carefully, he raised his arms and returned the hug. It felt strange, foreign, but also right. Like a door in his chest that had been nailed shut was finally creaking open. Grace came and wrapped her small arms around both of them, still silent, still voiceless. But her message was clear. We are family now, the three of us, bound together by blood and survival and something deeper than words could express. They stood like that for a long moment while the snow fell outside and the bodies cooled and the night settled back into uneasy peace. Then Ethan gently pulled away. We cannot stay here, he said. Blackwell will send more men when these do not report back. We need to move, now. Where? Victoria asked. Medicine Bow? Cheyenne? Fort Sanders, Ethan said. 40 miles west through Laramie Peak. There is a cavalry garrison there. Buffalo soldiers under Sergeant Isaiah Hayes. He owes me a debt. He will protect you. Victoria looked at him like he had suggested flying to the moon. 40 miles through the mountains in winter? That is suicide. Maybe, Ethan agreed, but staying here is certain death. And the mountain route is the one place Blackwell will not expect us to go. Everyone runs south towards civilization. We go west through hell and come out the other on twin. Victoria looked down at Grace. The little girl met her mother's eyes and nodded once. That tiny gesture of courage decided everything. When do we leave? Victoria asked. 1 hour. I need to pack supplies and saddle the horses. You need to dress warm. Layers. Everything you can wear. They worked quickly and efficiently. Ethan loaded the pack horse with dried venison, hardtack, 3 bedrolls, a small tent, coffee, ammunition, and medical supplies. He saddled his mare for himself, the older gelding for Victoria and Grace to ride together, and kept the pack horse on a lead line. Before they left, Ethan went to Margaret's grave one last time. The cross he had carved was barely visible under the snow that had accumulated over 2 years. He knelt down and brushed the white powder away, revealing her name. I am leaving for a while, he said softly. Maybe forever. I do not know if I am coming back, but I want you to know I kept my promise. I am protecting them. Victoria and Grace. I am living again. I hope that makes you happy, wherever you are. The wind whispered through the broken pines. It might have been his imagination, but Ethan thought he felt something like approval in that cold breath. Like Margaret was giving him permission to move forward, to let go of grief and embrace whatever life still had to offer. He stood and walked back to the house where Victoria and Grace waited with the horses. As they rode away from Broken Pine Ranch, Ethan did not look back. Some chapters had to end before new ones could begin. And this chapter, the one written in loneliness and mourning, was finally closing. The journey to Fort Sanders was 40 miles as the crow flies. But crows did not have to navigate through 10,000-foot mountain passes in December. For humans on horseback, hauling supplies through snow that reached the horses' chests in places, the journey would take 3 full days if they were lucky, 5 if they were not. And the weather, capricious as a spoiled child, could turn lethal without warning. They rode through the first day in relative silence. Grace sat in front of her mother, bundled in so many layers of clothing she looked like a tiny snowman. She had not spoken since the attack at the wagon, but her eyes were alert, constantly scanning the landscape for threats. She was learning to survive. That was good. Survival was the only skill that mattered out here. By late afternoon, they reached Elk Creek Canyon, a narrow defile where the walls rose 200 feet on either side, and the creek itself ran black and fast despite the cold. It was a natural choke point, a perfect place for an ambush. I do not like this, Ethan said, reining his mare to a halt. What is wrong? Victoria asked. Too narrow, too enclosed. If someone is waiting ahead, we are trapped. Can we go around? Not without adding a full day to the journey, and we do not have food for that. Victoria looked at Grace, then back at Ethan. So what do we do? We go through, Ethan said, but careful. Eyes open. They entered the canyon slowly, the horses' hooves echoing off the rock walls. The sound of the creek covered other noises, made it impossible to hear if anyone was moving ahead or behind. Ethan kept one hand on his rifle, his thumb on the hammer, ready to draw and fire in a single motion. They were halfway through when the voice called out, "That is far enough, Mr. Cole." 6 men stepped from behind boulders and rock formations, appearing like ghosts materializing from stone. They held rifles, pistols. One man had a shotgun, the worst weapon to face at close range, capable of cutting a man in half with buckshot. The man who had spoken stood in the center of the group. He was tall and lean, with a face like tanned leather and eyes the color of dirty ice. A knife hung from his belt in a beaded sheath, the handle wrapped in rattlesnake skin. Cole the Knife Johnson. Ethan knew the name. Everyone on the frontier knew the name. A bounty hunter and killer who had sent more than 50 men to early graves. Johnson, Ethan said calmly. Blackwell is paying you? 3,000 for the woman, Johnson said. 1,000 for the kid. 4,000 total. Best money I have seen in years. You do not have to do this, Ethan said. Ride away. Tell Blackwell you could not find us. Johnson smiled, revealing teeth stained brown from chewing tobacco. I could, but then I would not get paid. And I do like getting paid. You are going to have to kill me first, Ethan said. I figured, Johnson replied. Nothing personal, Cole, just business. Everything is personal, Ethan said. And then he kicked his mare hard and charged straight at Johnson. The bounty hunters were not expecting that. They expected negotiation, pleading, maybe an attempt to flee. They did not expect a lone man to charge six-armed killers like he was leading a cavalry unit at Gettysburg. Ethan fired the Winchester from horseback, the recoil jarring his shoulder. The bullet took one of Johnson's men in the chest, knocking him backward into the creek. Before the others could react, Ethan was among them, his horse a battering ram of muscle and momentum. He shot another man point blank with the revolver, saw the shock on the man's face before he went down. Then someone fired and Ethan's hat flew off, the bullet passing so close he felt the heat of it on his scalp. He wheeled the mare around, using the animal's bulk as cover. Victoria, God bless her, was not sitting idle. She had drawn one of the Colt revolvers Ethan had given her and was firing at the bounty hunters with surprising accuracy. One man grabbed his shoulder and ducked behind a rock, blood streaming between his fingers. "Grace!" Victoria shouted. "Get down!" The little girl flattened herself against the horse's neck. A bullet buzzed past where her head had been a second before. Ethan pulled a stick of dynamite from his saddlebag. He had brought 3 sticks, taken from the mining supplies in his barn, insurance against exactly this kind of situation. He lit the fuse with a match struck against his saddle horn and threw the dynamite toward a rock overhang above the bounty hunters. The explosion was deafening in the narrow canyon. Rock and debris rained down, creating a cloud of dust and smoke that obscured everything. 2 of Johnson's men were buried under falling stones. Another was knocked unconscious by a piece of shrapnel. Through the case, Ethan saw Johnson himself running toward Victoria's horse, his knife drawn, moving fast despite a limp in his left leg. The bounty hunter was going for Grace, trying to grab the child and use her as leverage. Ethan spurred his mare forward. Johnson saw him coming and threw the knife. The blade spun end over end through the air, a perfect throw born from years of practice. Ethan leaned hard to the left and felt the knife whisper past his ear, so close it nicked his earlobe. Blood ran hot down his neck. Then Ethan was on top of Johnson. He kicked the man in the chest, felt ribs crack under his boot heel. Johnson went down hard but rolled with the impact and came up with a revolver in his hand. He fired 3 times, fast as a snake striking. One bullet hit Ethan's saddle. Another killed the pack horse, the animal screaming as it fell. The third bullet found flesh, tearing through Ethan's left shoulder like a hot poker. Pain exploded through Ethan's arm. His vision went white for a second, but he did not fall, did not yield. He raised the Winchester one-handed and fired. The bullet caught Johnson in the thigh, spinning him around. Ethan fired again. This time the bullet went high, grazing Johnson's skull and leaving a bloody furrow across his temple. Johnson collapsed, not dead but badly wounded, out of the fight. The 3 surviving bounty hunters, seeing their leader down and half their number dead or injured, made the smart choice. They ran, disappeared back into the rocks like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Ethan dismounted slowly, his left arm hanging useless at his side, blood soaking through his coat. He walked to where Johnson lay, groaning in the snow, his own blood spreading around him in a dark halo. "Who sent you?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. "Blackwell," Johnson gasped. "He is in Cheyenne, at the Occidental Hotel. Has 20 men. He is gathering an army." "Why does he want the child so badly?" Ethan pressed. Johnson laughed, a wet sound that ended in a cough. "Because he is crazy. Thinks the girl is his second chance. His redemption? He does not care about the money. Never did. He cares about proving he is more than what they called him, more than a bastard, more than nothing." "Tell him something for me," Ethan said. "Tell him if he comes after them again, I will kill him myself, slowly, painfully, in ways that will make what I did to you look like mercy." Johnson's eyes widened. "You are letting me live?" "So you can deliver my message," Ethan said. "Now crawl away before I change my mind." Johnson dragged himself toward his horse, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. It took him 5 minutes to haul himself into the saddle. He looked back once at Ethan, something like respect in his eyes, then rode away toward the south. Victoria dismounted and ran to Ethan. "You are shot. Let me see." "It is not bad," Ethan lied, though the pain was making him dizzy. "It is bad," Victoria said firmly. She had been married to a soldier. She knew gunshot wounds. "Sit down before you fall down." Ethan sat. Victoria cut away his coat and shirt with a knife, exposing the wound. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone but tearing muscle. It would heal if infection did not set in. If he did not bleed to death first. Two big ifs. Victoria worked quickly, her hands steady despite the cold and the danger and the fear. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, packed it with clean cloth, and bound it tight. "You need a doctor," she said. "Later," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "Right now we need to move. Those men who ran will report back to Blackwell. He will know where we are and where we are going." "Can you ride?" Victoria asked. "I will ride," Ethan said, "one way or another." They redistributed the supplies from the dead pack horse onto the remaining two animals. It meant leaving behind some food in one of the bedrolls, but they had no choice. They mounted up, Ethan struggling to get into the saddle with only one working arm, and continued west through the canyon. That night they made camp in a small hollow protected from the wind. Ethan could not start a fire without revealing their position, so they huddled together under the blankets, sharing body heat, watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. Grace, who had been silent throughout the entire battle, suddenly spoke for the first time since the Wagon Massacre. Her voice was small and cracked from disuse, but clear as a bell in the cold night. "Mr. Cole," she said, "are you going to die?" Ethan looked at the little girl. In the starlight, her eyes were huge and frightened, the eyes of a child who had seen too much death and could not bear to see more. "No," he said, "I am not going to die, I promise." "People break promises," Grace said softly. "Grandfather promised to keep us safe. He died." "I am not your grandfather," Ethan said, "and I do not break promises. Ever." Grace studied his face for a long moment, then she scooted closer and laid her head against his good shoulder. "I believe you," she whispered. Victoria reached across her daughter and took Ethan's hand. She squeezed once, gently, a gesture of gratitude and solidarity, and something else he was afraid to name. They sat like that for a long time. The three of them, a makeshift family forged in blood and snow, and the shared determination to survive whatever came next. The second day was harder. Ethan's shoulder had stiffened overnight, the muscles swollen and hot with infection. Fever burned through his body. He swayed in the saddle, only Victoria's constant vigilance keeping him from falling. They passed through Medicine Bow around midday, stopping only long enough to see Dr. Samuel Winters. The old physician took one look at Ethan's wound and shook his head. "This needs proper treatment," Winters said. "You should stay here. Rest. Let the wound heal." "Cannot," Ethan said. "Men are hunting us. Need to keep moving." Winters sighed and cleaned the wound again, applying a poultice of herbs and honey that the Indians had taught him to make. "This will help with infection. But Ethan, you need to know something." "What?" Winters glanced at Victoria and Grace, then pulled Ethan into the next room out of earshot. "It is about Margaret." Ethan felt his heart clench. "What about her?" The old doctor's eyes were sad. "She made me promise not to tell you, but I think you need to know now. Margaret was pregnant when she died, 3 months along." The world tilted on its axis. Ethan had to grab the table to keep from falling. "What?" "She knew she was dying," Winters continued. "The smallpox was too advanced. She did not want you to carry double guilt, the guilt of losing her and the guilt of losing a child. So she made me swear I would never tell you unless I thought you were ready to hear it." Ethan could not speak, could not breathe. A child. They had been trying for years, Margaret desperate to be a mother, Ethan desperate to give her what she wanted. And finally it had happened. And then she died. And he never knew. "Why are you telling me now?" he finally managed. "Because of that little girl out there," Winters said. "Grace. Margaret left you a letter. She wrote it the night before she died. She told me to give it to you when you finally opened your heart to someone again. I think that time has come." Winters handed Ethan a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Ethan opened it with shaking hands and read, "My dearest Ethan, if you are reading this, it means you have found someone to love again, or perhaps someone to protect. I am so glad. You have too much goodness in you to waste it on mourning me forever. I need to tell you something. I was carrying our child when I died. A son, I think. I felt him. I knew him. And I am so sorry you will never get to meet him. But here is what I want you to understand. That child, our child, is gone. But there are so many children in this world who need fathers, who need protectors, who need men like you to stand between them in the darkness. Love them, Ethan. Love them like you would have loved our son. Be the father you never got to be, and do not feel guilty about it. This is not betrayal. This is fulfillment of everything we hope for. I will always be with you, in the wind, in the stars, in every act of kindness you show to those who need it most. Live well, my love. Live for both of us. Forever yours. Margaret. Ethan read the letter 3 times. Tears streamed down his face, hot against his fevered skin. All this time he had been holding on to guilt like a drowning man clutches a stone. And Margaret had been trying to free him, had been giving him permission to let go, to move forward, to become the man she always believed he could be. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket, next to his heart. Then he went back to the other room where Victoria and Grace waited. Grace looked up at him with those blue eyes that held so much wisdom for someone so young. "Are you okay, Mr. Cole?" Ethan knelt down, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and looked her in the eye. "Grace, I want to ask you something. Would it be all right if I became your father? Not to replace your real father, but to be here for you, to protect you, to teach you how to be strong." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Do you mean it?" "I have never meant anything more in my life." The little girl threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, please, I would like that very much." Victoria was crying too now, silent tears running down her cheeks. When Grace finally let go, Victoria cupped Ethan's face in her hands. "You are a good man, Ethan Cole. The best man I have ever known." And then, without planning it, without thinking about propriety or timing or what it might mean, they kissed. It was not a passionate kiss, not dramatic or cinematic. It was gentle, tender, the kiss of two people who had found each other in the darkness and decided to walk toward the light together. When they pulled apart, Dr. Winters wiped his eyes roughly. "Get out of here before I start crying too," he said gruffly. "And Ethan, do not die on them. They need you." "I know," Ethan said. "I know." They left Medicine Bow that afternoon and pushed west toward the mountains. The fever still burned in Ethan's blood, but it felt different now, not like sickness, like fire, like purpose, like the determination of a man who had finally found his reason to live. That night, they camped in sight of Laramie Peak, the mountain rising 10,000 feet into the darkening sky, its summit lost in clouds. Tomorrow, they would begin the climb. Tomorrow, they would enter the most dangerous part of the journey. But tonight, for the first time since this all began, Ethan felt something like hope. He sat by their small fire, Victoria on one side, Grace on the other, and thought about the strange path life takes, how loss leads to finding, how death makes room for new life, how the end of one story becomes the beginning of another. Margaret was gone, but she had given him one last gift, permission to love again, permission to be the father he never got to be, permission to keep living when every part of him had wanted to die. He would not waste that gift. In the morning, they would climb the mountain, Moan, and whatever waited on the other side, whether Thomas Blackwell and his army of killers or salvation at Fort Sanders, they would face it together. As a family, the word felt strange in his mind, foreign, but also right, more right than anything had felt in 2 long years. Grace fell asleep with her head in his lap. Victoria leaned against his good shoulder, her breathing slow and even. And Ethan, fevered and wounded and more alive than he had been since the day Margaret died, sat watch over them until the stars faded and dawn painted the eastern sky gold. The mountain waited, the enemy hunted, but for now, in this moment, they were safe. They were together. And that was enough. The climb up Laramie Peak began at dawn. 3 days had passed since they fled Broken Pine Ranch, 3 days of riding through snow and cold and fear. The temperature had dropped to 25 degrees below zero. Ice crystals hung in the air like suspended diamonds, each breath a knife in the lungs, each step a battle against nature itself. Ethan led the way on his mare, following the north trail that cut through pine forests so thick they blocked out the sun. Behind him came Victoria on the gelding, with Grace tucked in front of her, wrapped in so many layers the child looked like a bundle of rags with eyes. The wind howled through the trees like wolves calling to each other, a sound that raised the hair on the back of Ethan's neck. His shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat. The fever had not broken. If anything, it had gotten worse. But he could not afford to be weak now, not when they were so close. Fort Sanders lay on the western side of the peak, perhaps 15 miles distant as the crow flies. But crows did not have to navigate through snow 8 feet deep in places, did not have to find paths around frozen waterfalls and sheer cliff faces. They had been climbing for 3 hours when Victoria's horse stumbled. The gelding's front hoof caught on ice hidden beneath snow, and the animal went down hard, falling to its knees. Victoria managed to keep Grace from being thrown, but the impact jarred them both badly. Ethan dismounted quickly, ignoring the pain that lanced through his wounded shoulder. He checked the horse's legs, running his hands along each one, feeling for breaks or sprains. The gelding's right foreleg was swollen just above the fetlock. Not broken, thank God, but badly sprained. The animal could not carry weight, not for days. "We have a problem," Ethan said. Victoria understood immediately. "We cannot all ride one horse." "No," Ethan agreed, "we cannot." Grace looked between them, her blue eyes wide with fear. She had found her voice again over the past 2 days, but now she was silent once more, as if speaking might somehow make the situation worse. Ethan made a decision. "You and Grace take my mare. I will walk." "You are wounded and fevered," Victoria protested. "You cannot walk 15 miles through snow in your condition." "Watch me," Ethan said. He helped Victoria and Grace transfer to his mare. The horse snorted and stamped, unhappy about the extra weight, but willing. Ethan took the reins and began leading the animal up the trail, his boots crunching through the snow, crust with each step. It was brutal work. Within an hour, his legs burned with exhaustion. Within 2 hours, he was stumbling, barely able to place one foot in front of the other. But he kept moving, kept pushing forward, because stopping meant death. For all of them. They reached a narrow ledge around noon. The path here was barely 4 feet wide, cut into the side of the mountain with a sheer rock wall rising on one side and a 300-foot drop on the other. One wrong step would send horse and riders tumbling into the abyss below. Ethan went first, testing each section of trail before allowing Victoria to follow. The wind was vicious here, unobstructed by trees, blowing hard enough to make the horse shy sideways. Grace whimpered and buried her face in her mother's coat. They were halfway across when Ethan heard the sound, a deep rumble from above, growing louder, growing closer. "Avalanche! Move!" Ethan shouted. "Move now!" He pulled the mare forward, running now despite his exhaustion, despite the fever that made everything blurry and distant. Behind them, the rumble became a roar. A wall of snow and ice broke free from the cliff face above and came crashing down like the wrath of an angry god. God. They cleared the narrow section just as the avalanche hit. The force of it was tremendous, a physical blow that knocked Ethan off his feet. He held onto the reins with desperate strength as snow engulfed him, buried him, crushed the air from his lungs. For a terrible moment, he was back in the war, trapped under collapsed earthworks after a cannon blast, certain he was going to die in darkness and suffocation. Then hands grabbed him, pulled him upward, dragged him clear of the snow. He gasped for air, coughing, his vision clearing slowly to see Victoria standing over him, her face pale but determined. "Grace?" Ethan managed to croak. "She is safe," Victoria said. The horse jumped clear. "But Ethan, look." She pointed down the trail they had just crossed. Where the narrow ledge had been, there was now only empty space. The avalanche had taken the entire section of path with it, leaving a gap 50 feet wide. There was no going back now, no retreat. The only way was forward, and that was when they saw him, a figure on horseback emerging from the trees ahead. Then another and another, 6 riders in total, spread across the trail, blocking the way forward. At their center sat a man in a black coat, riding a gray stallion, his posture straight despite a noticeable limp in his left leg. Thomas Blackwell had found them. Ethan struggled to his feet, his hand going to the Colt revolver on his hip. But Blackwell raised a hand in a gesture that was almost peaceful. "Please, Mr. Cole," Blackwell called out, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "I am not here to fight, not yet. I want to talk. I want to." "We have nothing to say to you," Victoria shouted back. "On the contrary," Blackwell said, "we have a great deal to say, and I think you will want to hear it." He dismounted slowly, carefully, his left leg dragging slightly as he stepped down from the stirrup. Up close, Ethan could see that Blackwell was older than he expected, perhaps 48 or 50. His face was handsome in a severe way, all sharp angles and cold intelligence. But there was something broken in his eyes, something wounded that had never healed properly. "You must be Ethan Cole," Blackwell said, "the war hero turned rancher, the man who thinks he can save these two from their fate." "Their fate is none of your concern," Ethan said. "But it is," Blackwell insisted, "because Grace is mine. She has always been mine." Victoria stepped forward, fury blazing in her eyes. "Grace is my daughter, not yours. You have no claim to her." Blackwell's expression softened with melancholy. "Do I not? Let me tell you a story, Lady Victoria. Let me tell you why I have crossed an ocean and killed a dozen men to reach this moment." "We know your story," Victoria spat. "You were my mother's lover. My father humiliated you. So you killed him, and now you want revenge." "That is part of it," Blackwell admitted, "but not all. You see, I was the bastard son of the Duke of Somerset. My mother was a maid in his household. When she became pregnant, the Duke cast her out without a penny. She died when I was 7 years old, froze to death in a London alley while I held her hand and begged God to save her." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "I grew up in workhouses, in gutters. I clawed my way up through law school on scholarships and charity. I became successful, respected, and then I met your mother, the Countess of Ashford. She was beautiful and kind, and for the first time in my miserable life, I felt like I mattered, like I was more than just a bastard." "And she used you," Victoria said quietly. "Yes," Blackwell agreed. "She used me to make your father jealous, to punish him for his own affairs. And when he found out, he did not just end our relationship. He destroyed me. Publicly. Completely. He stood up in the House of Lords and announced to all of British nobility that I was the bastard son of a bastard duke. That I was nothing. That I would always be nothing." Ethan could see the pain in Blackwell's eyes now. Real pain. The kind that twisted a man's soul into something unrecognizable. "So you killed the Earl," Ethan said. "I did," Blackwell said without remorse. "Arsenic in his brandy over 6 months. Slow and painful. He deserved every moment of suffering." "And now you want Grace," Victoria said. "To what? Prove you can be a father? To show the world you are more than a bastard?" Blackwell looked at the little girl who was peeking out from behind her mother's skirts. His expression softened in a way that was almost heartbreaking. "I want Grace because she is innocent. Because she, like me, is a child born outside the bonds of matrimony. A child who will be called names and shunned by society. I can protect her from that. I can give her everything I never had. Money, education, a name that means something." "You can give her everything except love," Ethan said quietly. Blackwell's eyes snapped to him. "What do you know about love, Mr. Cole? You are a widower who let his wife die alone while you were off hunting. You are a man who failed at the most basic duty of a husband." The words hit like physical blows, but Ethan did not flinch. "You are right," he said. "I failed Margaret. I was not there when she needed me most. But I learned from that failure. I learned that love is not about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It is about showing up every day, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." He stepped forward, putting himself between Blackwell and Victoria and Grace. "You do not love that little girl. You love the idea of her. You love what she represents. But she is not a symbol. She is a child who needs a real father, not someone trying to fix their own broken past." Blackwell's face hardened. "You presume to lecture me about fatherhood? You who has no children of your own?" "I do now," Ethan said simply. "Grace asked me to be her father, and I said yes." For a moment, genuine shock passed across Blackwell's features. Then it was replaced by cold fury. "The girl does not know what she wants. She is 6 years old." "She knows enough," Ethan said. "She knows the difference between a man who wants to possess her and a man who wants to protect her." Blackwell was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was soft and dangerous. "I tried to do this peacefully, to negotiate, to make you see reason. But I can see now that words will not suffice." He turned to his men. "Take the girl. Kill the others. The gunmen began to advance. Ethan drew his Colt, but he knew it was Hopians. 6 against 1, and he was already wounded and fevered. He could maybe take 2 of them before they brought him down. Maybe 3 if he was lucky. But he would not go down without a fight. Then the world exploded with the sound of rifle fire. But it was not Blackwell's men shooting. It was someone else. From higher up the mountain. From positions Ethan had not seen. Bullets kicked up snow around the gunmen, forcing them to dive for cover. A voice boomed out across the mountainside, deep and commanding. United States Army, lay down your weapons. From the trees above emerged 20 soldiers wearing the blue uniforms of the cavalry. Buffalo Soldiers, the famed African-American regiments that had fought Indians and outlaws across the West. And at their head rode Sergeant Isaiah Hayes, a man Ethan recognized instantly. Hayes was 38 years old, tall and powerfully built, with scars on his face from a dozen battles. 2 years ago, Ethan had saved his life. A lynch mob in Medicine Bow had been about to string Hayes up for defending himself against 3 white men who had attacked him. Ethan had intervened, had stood between Hayes and the mob with his rifle and a look that said he would kill any who tried to get past him. The mob had backed down. Hayes had lived, and now he was returning the favor. Ethan Cole, Hayes called out, a grin splitting his scarred face. You have a talent for finding trouble, old friend. Isaiah, Ethan managed, relief washing through him so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. You have good timing. Sheriff Brennan sent a telegram to the fort 3 days ago, Hayes explained. Said you might need help, so I gathered up some boys and came looking. He turned his attention to Blackwell. And who might you be? Thomas Blackwell, the man said, his voice tight with fury, and this is a private matter. Any matter involving drawn weapons on federal land is Army business, and Hayes said. Now I'm going to ask you one time nicely, right away, take your men, leave these people alone. That child is my property, Blackwell insisted. That child is a human being, Hayes shot back, not property. We fought a war to settle that question. Or were you too busy in England to notice? Blackwell looked around at the soldiers surrounding him, at the rifles pointed in his direction, at the hopelessness of his position. His face twisted with rage and desperation. This is not over, he said to Victoria. I will have her, one way or another. No, Ethan said quietly. It ends here. Blackwell laughed bitterly. You think the Army can protect her forever? I have resources, connections. I will find a way. Maybe, Ethan said, but you will have to go through me first. And I am a lot harder to kill than you think. For a moment, Blackwell seemed about to say something else. But then the mountain itself intervened. The sound started as a low rumble, distant and ominous. Then it grew, louder, closer. The snow beneath their feet began to tremble. Avalanche, Hayes shouted. Move! Everyone move! They scattered, humans and horses fleeing in all directions, as another massive wall of snow broke free from the peak above. This one was bigger than the first, much bigger. A white tsunami that devoured everything in its path. Ethan grabbed Grace and ran, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. Victoria was beside him, Hayes on his other side. They dove behind a massive boulder just as the avalanche roared past, missing them by inches. When the rumbling finally stopped and the snow settled, Ethan looked back at where Blackwell had been standing. The trail was gone, buried under 20 feet of snow. And somewhere in that frozen tomb was Thomas Blackwell. They spent an hour digging, the soldiers working with shovels brought from the pack horses. They found 2 of Blackwell's men, frozen and dead. They found 3 horses, but they did not find Blackwell himself, until Hayes called out from near the edge of the new snowfield. Over here! Ethan hurried over, his heart sinking. Blackwell was half buried, only his head and one arm visible above the snow. He was still alive, barely, his lips blue and his eyes glazed with shock. Ethan knelt beside him. We are going to dig you out. No, Blackwell whispered. Do not bother. I can feel it. My back is broken. I cannot feel my legs. We can get you to a doctor. For what? Blackwell asked bitterly. So I can spend the rest of my life as a cripple in a prison cell? No thank you, Mr. Cole. Let me die here, in the snow, like my mother died. Victoria approached slowly, Grace clutching her hand. The little girl looked down at the man who had terrorized them across thousands of miles. "Mr. Blackwell," Grace said softly, "why did you want to hurt us?" Blackwell's eyes focused on her. For a moment, something like clarity passed across his face. "I did not want to hurt you, child. I wanted to save you, to give you the life I never had. But I went about it all wrong, did I not?" "Yes," Grace said simply. "Can you forgive me?" Blackwell asked. Grace thought about this for a long moment. Then she said, "I do not know, maybe someday, but not today." Blackwell's face transformed, a genuine expression of regret crossing his features for the first time. "That is fair. That is more than fair." He looked at Ethan. "Protect her. Please be the father I could never be." "I will," Ethan promised. "And you," Blackwell said to Victoria. "Your mother loved me once, before everything went wrong. Tell her I never stopped loving her, even when I hated her, even at the end." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will tell her." Blackwell's breathing was getting shallower. His eyes began to close. "It is getting dark," he whispered. "So dark, but I am not afraid anymore. I think my mother is waiting for me. I can almost see her." And then he was gone. They buried him there on the mountainside under a cairn of stones that the soldiers helped build. Victoria said a prayer over the grave, words about forgiveness and redemption, and the hope that even broken souls could find peace on the other side. As they rode down from the mountain toward Fort Sanders, Ethan thought about what he had seen in Blackwell's eyes at the end. Not evil, not madness, just pain. The kind of pain that came from a lifetime of rejection and humiliation. The kind of pain that twisted love into obsession and hurt into violence. He thought about how easily he could have become that man. If Margaret had rejected him instead of loved him. If the world had ground him down instead of building him up. How many small choices separated a good man from a monster? They reached Fort Sanders 3 days later. The cavalry post was small but well maintained, with barracks for 200 soldiers, stables for the horses, and a hospital where Ethan's wound could be properly treated. The post surgeon, a German immigrant named Dr. Klaus Werner, examined Ethan's shoulder and shook his head. "You are lucky to be alive. Another day and the infection would have killed you." He cleaned the wound thoroughly, cutting away dead tissue and packing it with fresh bandages. The pain was excruciating, but Ethan bore it silently, Grace holding his good hand the entire time, her small fingers squeezing tight whenever he flinched. "You are very brave," she told him afterward. "Not as brave as you," Ethan replied. "You lost your grandfather. You were chased across the country by killers. You climbed a mountain in winter. And you are still here, still fighting. That takes real courage." Grace smiled and hugged him carefully, mindful of his wounded shoulder. "I am glad you are my father now," she whispered. Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "So am I, Grace. So am I." A week passed at the fort. Ethan's fever broke on the third day. His wound began to heal cleanly, the infection defeated by Dr. Werner's skill and Grace's constant presence. Victoria spent her days writing letters to England, to her mother, to lawyers, to anyone who might have evidence to clear her name and prove Blackwell's guilt. The response came faster than expected. A telegraph arrived from London addressed to Lady Victoria Ashford. She read it in the commander's office with Ethan beside her. "Evidence secured, stop. Blackwell letters confessing murder found in his chambers. Stop, Scotland Yard. Inspector confirms arsenic poisoning. Stop, your name cleared. Stop, inheritance secured. Stop. Return home or stay in America, your choice. Stop. Love, Mother." Victoria set down the telegram with shaking hands. "It is over," she whispered. "We are free." "Oh." "What will you do?" Ethan asked quietly. He had been dreading this question. Dreading the moment when Victoria would have to choose between her old life of wealth and title in England, or a new life of uncertainty in America with a wounded rancher and a broken-down ranch. Victoria turned to him. "My mother wants me to return to London, to take my place in society, to marry the Duke of Somerset and secure the family legacy." Ethan nodded, his heart sinking. "That makes sense. It is your birthright." "It is," Victoria agreed, "but it is not my future. My future is here, with you, with Grace, building something new instead of preserving something old." Hope flickered in Ethan's chest. Are you certain? I cannot give you castles or servants or fancy balls. I do not want castles, Victoria said. I want a home, a real home, with a man who loves me for who I am, not for what I represent. And Grace? Grace needs a father. She already chose you. I am just following her lead. Ethan pulled the rawhide cord from around his neck and held up Margaret's ring. I've been carrying this for 2 years, he said, holding on to the past. But I think it is time to let go, not to forget Margaret. Never that, but to honor her by moving forward. He knelt down on one knee, his shoulder aching, but his heart full. Lady Victoria Ashford, will you marry me? Will you come back to Broken Pine Ranch and help me build a life there? It will not be easy. It will not be fancy, but it will be real, and it will be ours. Victoria's face lit with joy despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, Ethan Cole, I will marry you. I will go wherever you go and build whatever you build, because that is what family does. They kissed then, a kiss that tasted of salt and hope and the promise of new beginnings. And when they pulled apart, Grace was there, her arms wrapped around both of them, binding the three of them together in a knot that would not easily be untied. The wedding took place at Fort Sanders 2 weeks later. It was a simple ceremony performed by the post chaplain, attended by Sergeant Hayes and his men, by Dr. Werner, by the few settlers who lived nearby. Victoria wore a dress of white cotton that she had sewn herself. Ethan wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed as well as he could manage. Grace was the flower girl, scattering wild mountain flowers down the makeshift aisle. She had written her own vows, which she read in a clear, strong voice. I promise to be a good daughter. I promise to help with the ranch. I promise to love you both forever. And I promise to remember grandfather, but not let his death make me afraid of living. There was not a dry eye in the chapel. After the ceremony, Sergeant Hayes pulled Ethan aside. What will you do now? He asked. Go home, Ethan said. Rebuild the ranch, raise Grace, live the life Margaret wanted me to live. And the debt? The $800 to the bank? Ethan shrugged. I will find a way. I always do. Hayes smiled and handed him an envelope. From Victoria's mother, she wired it through the Army paymaster. Consider it a wedding gift. Ethan opened the envelope and nearly dropped it in shock. Inside was a bank draft for $50,000. $50,000? He gasped. The Countess of Ashford is not a poor woman, Hayes said with a grin, and apparently she approves of her daughter's choice. The letter says you are to use it to rebuild the ranch, buy cattle, hire good men. She wants her granddaughter to grow up in prosperity, even if it is American prosperity instead of British. Ethan stared at the draft, his mind reeling. $50,000, more money than he had ever imagined having. Enough to not just save Broken Pine, but to turn it into something truly special. There is one condition, Hayes added. You have to name the ranch after Margaret, so her memory lives on. Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. Margaret's Promise, he said softly. I will call it Margaret's Promise Ranch. I think she would like that, Hayes said. They left Fort Sanders on a bright March morning when the snow was finally melting and the first flowers were pushing through the earth. The journey back to Broken Pine took 4 days of easy riding, no longer running from danger, no longer fighting for survival, just a family traveling home. When they crested the final rise and saw the ranch spread out below them, Ethan felt his heart lift. The house still stood, though bullet-scarred and in need of repair. The barn leaned but had not fallen. The land stretched out in all directions, empty and waiting, full of potential. It is not much to look at, Ethan admitted. It is perfect, Victoria said, because it is ours. They spent the next 3 months rebuilding. Ethan hired 10 good men with the money from Victoria's mother. They repaired the house, straightened the barn, built new fences, bought a herd of 200 cattle from a rancher in Colorado who was selling out. They planted a garden. They painted the house. They carved a new sign for the gate, Margaret's Promise Ranch. Grace thrived in the fresh air and open spaces. She learned to ride like a Comanche, to rope cattle like a vaquero, to shoot like her father. She still had nightmares sometimes, waking in the night calling for her grandfather. But Ethan was always there, sitting beside her bed, telling her stories until she fell back asleep. Victoria proved to be a better rancher than anyone expected. She had a head for numbers and organization. She set up accounts with merchants in Cheyenne and Denver. She negotiated contracts for beef sales. She turned Margaret's promise from a failing homestead into a thriving business. And Ethan finally became the man Margaret had always believed he could be. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole, healed. A husband again, a father for the first time, a guardian who had kept his promise. On the one-year anniversary of their wedding, Victoria told him she was pregnant. A boy, I think, she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. We will name him Thomas, after Blackwell, to remember that even broken men deserve to be remembered for something other than their crimes. Ethan thought about this, about the man who had tried to kill them, who had chased them across mountains and through winter storms, who had died in the snow, alone and afraid, calling for a mother who had been dead for 40 years. Thomas Cole, Ethan said. I think Margaret would approve. 9 months later, the baby was born, a healthy boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They baptized him at the small church in Medicine Bow, with Sergeant Hayes standing as godfather. The years rolled forward like seasons, each one bringing new growth to Margaret's Promise Ranch. The first year after Thomas's birth, they expanded the herd to 300 head. The second year, they built a proper bunkhouse with room for 15 men. The third year, Victoria established accounts with beef buyers in Denver and Cheyenne, doubling their profits. By the fourth year, the ranch covered 800 acres, purchased with money from careful savings and Victoria's shrewd investments. They built a schoolhouse for the children of ranch hands, hired a teacher from back east, and started a lending library in the barn's upper loft. The house itself transformed. What had been a simple 3-room cabin now stood 2 stories tall with a wraparound porch, glass windows from St. Louis, and a stone fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig. Grace had her own room filled with books. Thomas had a nursery that would soon become a boy's room. And Ethan and Victoria shared a bedroom that caught the morning sun. The land that had once fought Ethan at every turn now flourished under their combined efforts. Fences stood straight and strong. Cattle grew fat on good grass and careful management. The barn no longer leaned. The well ran clear and deep. Even the broken pines that gave the ranch its old name seemed to stand taller, their branches reaching toward Wyoming's endless sky. Ethan's reputation as a fair employer spread. Men came from 3 territories seeking work, knowing they would be paid honest wages for honest labor. Veterans of the war, former slaves seeking new lives, immigrants fresh off ships from Europe, all found welcome at Margaret's Promise. And 5 years after that, when Grace was 12 and Thomas was 4 and Victoria was pregnant again with their 3rd child, a family came to the ranch. Refugees from a pogrom in Russia, traveling west with nothing but the clothes on their backs and hope in their hearts. Grace saw them first. She came running to the house where Ethan was mending a saddle on the porch. "Pa, there is a wagon coming. They look scared." Ethan stood and shaded his eyes against the sun. He could see them now. A man and woman, middle-aged and exhausted. 3 children, thin as rails. A wagon that looked ready to fall apart. "What do we do?" Grace asked. Ethan thought about a winter 5 years ago, about being found in the snow by a man with a good heart, about being given a second chance when he thought all chances were gone. "We helped them," he said simply, "like someone once helped us." Victoria joined him on the porch, Thomas holding her hand. "Do you know them?" she asked. "No," Ethan said, "but that does not matter." They walked out to meet the wagon together. The man driving looked at them with the eyes of someone who had run too far and could not run anymore. "We are lost," the man said in heavily accented English. "We look for work, for place to stay. You have work, maybe?" Ethan looked at Victoria. She smiled and nodded. He looked at Grace. She was grinning. "We have work," Ethan said. "We have food. We have a bunkhouse where you can stay until you get on your feet. Welcome to Margaret's Promise Ranch." The man's eyes filled with tears. "Why you help us? You do not know us." "Because someone once helped me," Ethan said, "and I made a promise that I would pass that help along, that I would protect those who needed protecting, that I would live for something bigger than myself." He extended his hand. "My name is Ethan Cole. This is my wife, Victoria, my daughter, Grace, my son Thomas, and you are welcome here for as long as you need." The man took his hand and shook it firmly. "Bless you," he whispered. "God bless you." As they led the family toward the bunkhouse, as Grace ran ahead to show the children where they would sleep, as Victoria went to prepare food for the hungry travelers, Ethan felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness, of completion. The broken pine had bent in many storms, but it had not broken. It had grown stronger at the broken places, had sent out new branches, had sheltered others from the cold. That night, after everyone was fed and settled, Ethan walked up the hill behind the house where Margaret was buried. Her cross still stood, though weathered by 5 years of wind and rain and snow. He knelt beside it and placed his hand on the cold wood. "I kept my promise," he said softly. "I lived, I loved again, I protected those who needed protecting. And I am going to keep doing it, for as long as I draw breath, because that is what you taught me, that life is not about what we take, it is about what we give." The wind whispered through the pines. It might have been his imagination, but Ethan thought he heard her voice in that wind, gentle, approving, telling him that he had done well, that he was finally the man he was meant to be. He stood and looked down at the ranch spread out below, at the house with smoke rising from the chimney, at the barn full of cattle and horses, at the bunkhouse where a refugee family slept safely for the first time in months, at his wife and children who were his whole world. The Guardian's redemption was complete, not because he had defeated an enemy, not because he had survived impossible odds, but because he had learned the most important lesson of all, that the broken can be mended, that the lost can be found, that winter always gives way to spring, and that a promise made in love is the only promise worth keeping. Ethan Cole, once a broken widower waiting to die, had become something greater. A husband, a father, a guardian, a man who stood between the darkness and those who could not stand for themselves. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The end.